This recipe is going to make you and 3 of your friends very happy.
Let's see what's cooking. Let's get the facts. Let's see what's cooking. It's time for Yo-Yo Max 12.
Hello everyone. First thing we're going to do is make the starter for this cake. Starting off with a medium-sized saucepan, you will place 3 cups of apple juice in there, followed by half a cup of white granulated sugar and 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. And just give that a stir to dissolve the sugar, and you're going to slowly heat this until the mixture reaches 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's not very hot. It's not going to take very long, and I use an instant read thermometer just to make sure that it didn't get too hot. Now basically you just heat it up until it feels warm to the touch, not too hot. Once you reach that point, take it off the heat, and then you're going to add in 1/4 ounce or a package or about a tablespoon of instant active dry yeast, and then just stir that around until the yeast is mostly dissolved into the liquid. Now you're going to need a large container. I'm using a 2-quart glass jar. You can also use a large bowl. And in that, place 1 10-ounce jar of maraschino cherries and liquid into the jar, and then that apple juice mixture. And you just saw I spilled a whole bunch on my countertop, and it went down into the drawer, and I had to empty the drawer, and I had to clean the drawer. It was quite the adventure. Stir that up, and you're going to let this sit at room temperature on your countertop. Lightly cover it. I just used a plastic lid. I just put the lid gently on top and then let it sit. This is day 2. Day 2, all you're going to do on day 2 is stir it twice. And I stirred it once in the morning and once before I went to bed. And you'll notice that the liquid will get all bubbly, and even actually for me, the maraschino cherry started to float up to the top. That's day 2. Day 3, we are going to add in 2 cups of raisins. So add the raisins, give it a stir, and then you're going to stir it once again later on in the day. Now on day 4, we're going to add in 7 ounces or 1 1/4 cups of dried apricots that have been chopped up. So just put those little pieces of fruit in there, and then you're going to give it a stir. And what's also interesting with this is the maraschino cherries were bright red, but as the days went on, the cherries started to get very pale and started to lose their color, which was kind of interesting. Welcome to day 5. Day 5, we need to add some pineapple, and I was running out of room in my jar. Thought it'd be just too hard to stir. So I added a 15-ounce can of crushed pineapple with the juice to the fruit mixture in a large bowl. I just gave that a stir. Now, the recipe at this point wants you to separate the fruit from the juice that's in that bowl. So I did that. I put the fruit and the juice through a strainer to separate the two. Now, I followed the recipe directions because it's the first time I make this, but in hindsight, this is kind of a completely unnecessary step. You don't have to divide the fruit and the juice. Leave it all in the same big bowl. Now, the recipe wants you to take 1 1/4 cups of fruit, put it in a 2-cup jar, and add to that about 3/4 of a cup of the juice. So you're going to make 4 jars from this. All the jars are going to be pretty much full up to the top, basically was what's going to happen. So I think you can very easily, without measuring, just take the fruit and the juice out of the bowl with a ladle and put it into your jars and fill them up to the top. And you'll get 4 of them that are going to pretty much full up to the top. Then you're going to put a little lid on them, and they're going to go in the refrigerator. You're going to keep them stored in the refrigerator until you use them, and you can keep them in the fridge for about 2 weeks. Now, the whole point of this recipe is you end up with 4 of these jars, and these are the starters you're going to need to make your cake. So you give them to your friends. That's why it's called a friendship cake. You just give your friends a jar of this starter and some instructions of how to make their own cake. And what I did is I wrote the date, the use by date on the jars, so that if you give them to people, they know how long they have before they have to make their cakes. So you end up with 4 jars of starter. I'm going to use one of those jars of starter to make my own cake here. So this has kind of a crumble topping on it. That's 2 tablespoons of butter, half a cup of packed brown sugar, and a half a cup of chopped pecans or walnuts. And then you just mix that together until it's kind of crumbly and then set it aside. And for the actual cake part, we're going to use a cake mix. And I love recipes that use cake mixes. I found this one in this book called The Cake Doctor Deluxe Edition. And I actually found this at a thrift store in the book section. It needs a cake mix. It says it wants an 18-ounce cake mix. Now, apparently, they don't make those anymore. Just like everything else, the prices, in order to keep the prices the same, they have reduced the package size. I don't know what impact this is going to have on recipes, but these are the facts. That's more of a 14-ounce size. That's the biggest one you can get. Now, I'm going to leave a blooper in here, and my camera took a little header right into that cake mix. And I ended up having to spend 10 minutes cleaning my camera afterwards. It was a little bit of swearing involved. Now to this, you're going to add 3 eggs, 1/3 of a cup of vegetable oil, and 1 jar of starter. And then just blend it together. Now I used an electric mixer because I wanted to actually break up those cherries a little bit. I didn't want whole cherries in the cake. I wanted the cherries to be broken up. So I blended it with an electric mixer, but you don't have to. You can easily do this with a wooden spoon. So one of the suggestions I have is that if you don't want big hunks of cherry in the cake, then I would cut up those maraschino cherries in halves or in quarters before I put them in the starter. But that's a personal preference thing. That's up to you. Then pour this batter into a 9 by 13 inch baking dish that's been well greased. Then you'll take that topping that we just blended and you're just going to sprinkle it over the top of the cake. Now the recipe photo in that book shows a cake that has a distinctive topping. You can see the topping on it. And for me, I found that after it had finished baking, basically everything just sunk into the cake and you couldn't really see it. So I don't know if that had anything to do with the fact that it's a smaller cake mix and maybe that the batter's not quite as thick as it normally would be because there's less cake mix. I'm not sure. There's a thought there. And once that's on your cake, you're going to bake this at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes until when you touch the cake, it lightly springs back when you touch it and it starts to pull away from the sides of the pan. Now, if you're using a glass baking dish, this might increase your baking time a little bit. It did for me about another extra 10 minutes or so. And there it is, baked and out of the oven. It's a kind of a very crumbly cake. It kind of falls apart. It is hard to kind of cut into nice pieces to get it out of the pan. The fruit sinks to the bottom a little bit. But you do get some that is inside the center of the cake. It's very sweet, very fruity. It is quite good. It's quite good. Is it worth waiting 5 days to make? Nah, I don't know. But if someone gives you the starter and you throw it together with a cake mix, then you know what? You end up with quite a nice dessert. Now, what would make this cake better, in fact, I think it would make it much better, is if you use a different cake batter. And I'm going to suggest you use this cake batter. Use the batter part from this recipe, the blueberry coffee cake. So you're going to use just the batter that has a cream cheese in it. So I'm going to offer those suggestions in the description box below. I think it would make for a denser, more flavorful cake that cuts into better pieces and isn't quite as crumbly. That's going to be my recommendation. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.